All right, good evening. Thank you for coming, everyone, on short notice to special time, but shortened version. But the daf goes on as we write in the chats. And Nun Zayin Beis, we are about halfway down on the page. B'mai kamifligi. What is the argument that Rabbi Yoshia and Rabbi Yonasan are having that we discussed yesterday? We were discussing about the sanctification in a dry container, a dry utensil container, versus a measuring container made for liquid measures. So the argument is be'osam. They're arguing in the pasuk, which is in Bamidbar. You'll pick up once we get to the new topic and things. But the pasuk says that vayim shachem vayikadesh osam, that they anointed them. So the question is, what is them? Rabbi Yoshia suffer osam. When it says them, it's lemute midas yavish bachutz. It's to tell us that they did not sanctify the dry containers on the outside. And Rabbi Yonasan says, Midas Yavish Cholhu Velo Itzrich Kro Lemute. The dry containers they don't have any sanctity. And so therefore, without any sanctity, they don't need to be anointed at all. And that's Rabbi Yonasan's point. Since they're not sanctified, the lechem hapanim, which is measured in those utensils, don't become sanctified until you put them on the shulchan. Hence, the question that we were starting with is, can you be in violation of kneading the lechem hapanim in making them chametz? Because they can't become chametz because they're not lechem hapanim yet, right, until after you bake them. So that's why not. Ki yitzrich kra, so therefore, ki yitzrich kra limute midas halach mi b'chutz. Therefore, what he says, the pasuk is talking about the liquid measurements on the outside. So he says that's what the osam is for. Okay, now lema nami Rabbi Akiva ve'echad min talmidei Rabbi Yishmael amru davar echad. So let's say that Rabbi Akiva and one of Rabbi Yishmael's students, they said the same thing, and Manu, who was this? This was Rabbi Yonasan. Let's say their argument is the same thing about whether a dry utensil is sanctifying things in order to make them holy and consecrated or not. Mishum deloshavu b'midas lach lehadadi. The Gemara says, no, even though when it comes to the dry utensil, they both agree that they're not holy, nevertheless, the difference is that they do have an argument as far as the liquid containers. Rabbi Yonasan holds that a liquid container only consecrates that which is inside of it, not on the outside. Rabbi Akiva, later on, we're going to get to it on Daf Tzadi, that it is going to sanctify both on the inside and the outside. So as far as that's concerned, they don't hold the same thing. They do agree on the dry container, though, that it doesn't have sanctity. Okay, Amar le Rav Papa Abaye. Rav Papa says to Abaye, "Ha'ika bisa delahu." So he says, "Well, 1 second. We have what about the bisa, which I think is a basin? Really, it's like a container. It's a bowl that you need the dough in, right? What about when you're kneading the dough for the lechem hapanim? I understand when you measure the flour, you have a dry container and therefore it's not sanctifying. But once you put it into the basin that you're going to knead the dough in and you add the liquid to it in order to turn it into a dough, that should be a container that becomes sanctified. And if it becomes chametz in that container, that's where you violate the prohibition against allowing any of a mincha from becoming sanctified. So Amar le kigon shalosh al gabe kitabulia. The answer is that we're talking about a circumstance where they didn't do the kneading in a basin, right? They did it on top of some kind of a skin, some skins, like a mat or something that they were doing the kneading on, but they didn't do it inside of a utensil, therefore it didn't become sanctified. Ihachi, if that's true. So then, the Amar le Rabbi Yonasan, then what is Rabbi Yonasan saying? Teidol lecha shaharei eina mikadeshes. Why does he say, you know that this lechem upon him doesn't have a prohibition of chametz because it was never sanctified. Lemolei kagon dekalya bisaron dechol. Why didn't he just say, well, maybe it's not because they measured it in a utensil. They could have theoretically measured it in an unsanctified utensil, despite the fact that other dry utensils were sanctified, they may have used a non-sanctified utensil. Hachi hashta. No, you can't say that because bishlam bisa delo kasav rachmana delavid bisa lemelash ba. As far as kneading it's concerned, the utensil is not necessary. The Torah never says that you need to knead it in any kind of specific utensil. Ki losh la gabe katabuya leislan bas. If you knead it on top of some kind of a leather mat or something, then there's no problem with that. But el isaron. When it comes to measuring the flour, the pasuk says Avid Yisron v'kayobe. When it says it has to be an Isar measurement, that means you're using one of the measurements of the Beis Hamikdash. Shavik Yisron dekodesh v'kayobe Yisron dechol. How could you go and avoid using the measurement utensils that the Beis Hamikdash owns and use a non-sanctified utensil for service in the Beis Hamikdash? It would make no sense. So therefore, you must say that they used the regular Beis Hamikdash utensils, but they were not sanctified. Okay, now we're going to talk some new things. Tana Rabbanan Rabbi Zor. Minayin lema'ale mibasar chatos mibasar osham mibasar kodshe kodshim. How do we know, right? If somebody is going to burn on the mizbeach, he burns from the meat that comes from an osham korban, or the meat that comes from holy of holy korbanos, like for example, shalmei tzibor, right? The offerings that belong to the community. So these are offerings that part of them are supposed to be burned on the mizbeach, but the rest of them are consumed by people. So what if I take the part that somebody's supposed to eat and I burn that on the mizbeach? Also mikachim kalim, also the lesser sanctified offerings, right, that a person is supposed to eat and they're not supposed to be burned. So umimosar ha'omer, also the leftover mincha. The korban ha'omer is a barley offering. You take one scoop of it, you burn that. The rest of it's supposed to be eaten. Umimosar shtei halechem. Also, from the leftover of the two breads that were brought on Shavuos, one part of it is supposed to be burned and the other parts are supposed to be consumed. Umi lechem apanim, the lechem apanim is supposed to be eaten, right? Actually, the shtei lechem doesn't have any part burned on the mizbeach. We'll see that in a moment. The lechem apanim are 2 loaves of bread. The sheep that go with it are offered as sacrifices, but the 2 loaves are not. And the lechem apanim was put on the showbread that was put on the shulchan was completely eaten and it wasn't burned either. Umi shiyari menachos, also the leftover bread from a mincha, where we take the kmitza and some of it is burned, the rest of it is supposed to be eaten. How do I know that if I burn all of those things on the mizbeach, when those are foods that are supposed to be eaten, shehu below saseh, that there's a prohibition? It's prohibited to burn on the mizbeach, summary, it's prohibited to burn on the mizbeach some part of the korban that's supposed to be eaten. How do I know that? Talmud Lomar, the pasuk says, we're in Vayikra now, we're going to say it's next week's parsha, right? It's already 1 week from this week's parsha. Pay very close attention, all the korbanos that are coming up in Parshas Vayikra Tzav, these are all the sections that we should know really well. Ki kol seor v'chol dvash lo saktiru mimenu ishel Hashem. All of the leavening and all of the honey should not be burned as a fire to Hashem. So kol shehu mimenu liishim, the way we're going to interpret this is, anything that from this sacrifice that's supposed to be burned, harehu bebal taktiru, you're not allowed to burn. Meaning, if I've got a sacrifice and the Torah says burn part of it, then there's a prohibition, don't burn the rest of it. The other parts are supposed to be eaten. I'm just going to grab a tissue. So, therefore, that's what this is telling me. Now, Shtei halechem, the question that we have is, in this list, we've got sacrifices, so I get it, there's a portion of it, we throw the blood, there's portions, there are fats and things that are supposed to be burned on the mizbeach, and then the meats are supposed to be eaten by kohanim or eaten by the owners. We get all that. But there are a few offerings on this list that none of it is burned. And that is the shtei halechem v'lechem apanim. What about the 2 breads? We were talking a lot last couple of weeks about these 2 loaves of bread that were offered on Shavuos together with 2 sheep. The sheep are offered as sacrifices. You slaughter them. You're supposed to burn part of the sheep on the mizbeach, and then the rest get eaten by the kohanim. So the bread that goes with it, though, is completely eaten by the kohanim. None of that gets brought on the mizbeach. There's no kmitza for the shtei halechem. There's also no kmitza on the lechem apanim. As we said, the lechem apanim is baked, and then it gets put onto the table, and that's it. There's nothing that's burned on the mizbeach. Yesh mehen liishim, is there any part of that gets burned in fire? And if there's no part of it burned in fire, why is there a prohibition against burning that on the mizbeach? It only says if there's some other part that's burned on the mizbeach, then there's a prohibition burning it in fire. V'hatanya, we learned in a brisa. Yotzu shtei halechem v'lechem apanim. You know what's excluded as far as the requirement, which we're going to learn on Daf Samech, which is upcoming, that one of the things that you have to do with a korban mincha is called hagasha. That's where you take the container that you've got the dough not the dough, but the mincha that you're offering, and you have to touch that bowl to the corner of the mizbeach, the southwest corner. Okay, so you're going to touch that bowl to the southwest corner. That's part of the service. And in that pasuk it says, right, that you're supposed to. There are certain sacrifices, certain mincha offerings that you don't have to do that. So it says, you know which ones that you don't? Yotzu shtei alechem velechem apanim. The 2 loaves of bread on Shavuos you don't, and the lechem apanim loaves you don't. How come? Why? Because the pasuk says that you're supposed to bring the mincha that you're doing from them to Hashem. And so that means that only if there's a mincha that part of it is burnt to Hashem, you bring close to the mizbeach. So she'ein mehem lishim. These korbanos, the 2 loaves of bread, and the lechem apanim, none of that's burned on the mizbeach. Therefore, there's no requirement to touch the remainder of it to the mizbeach. Okay, but if none of it's burned, then why does it fall into the prohibition against burning if none of it is already burned? So Amar Rav Sheshes says, Ein migufo leishim. You're right. Those items themselves are not burned. However, the rest of the sacrifice is burned. Right, the rest of the sacrifice is burned. In other words, the parts of the shlomim is burned. Parts of, as far as the lechem apanim goes, there's what we call the bazichin. Those are the frankincense that comes with it, and that gets burned. So therefore, we see there are parts of it. Right, the item itself is not burned, but there are parts of the korban itself that is burned. Okay, now Itmar, bottom of Nun Zayin, we're still towards the bottom there. Itmar, it has been said, Hamala mikulam. So let's say if I take any of these items that are prohibited to burn on the mizbeach, any of these items that are prohibited to go on the mizbeach that we just learned, al gabe hakeves. Let's say I put them on the ramp. So we had discussion in Zvachim whether the ramp is considered to be part of the mizbeach or not. So let's say I put it up onto the ramp. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Chayev. Rabbi Yochanan says, yeah, it's the same problem. You can't put it on the mizbeach, you can't put it on the ramp. And Rabbi Elazar Amar Pater. Rabbi Elazar says, no, the ramp and the mizbeach are 2 separate entities, not the same. So Rabbi Elazar
said that the ramp is not considered an extension.
It's not an extension. Correct, exactly. So Rabbi Yochanan Amar Chayev. So Rabbi Yochanan says, you're liable because it's part of the mizbeach. Why? Ditanya, we learned in a brisa. Pasuk says, Vayikra Perik Beis Pasuk Yud Beis, quoting the Pasuk first, and then we're staying inside. It is the korban reishis takrivos on Hashem vel mizbeach lo yalu l'reach nichoach. This is a first korban you should bring close to Hashem, and it should not go on the mizbeach. So it says, the pasuk says that says mizbeach. Right, it's supposed to go on the altar. That's where it's supposed to go. Ainli ela mizbeach. So that means that only if you put this on the mizbeach are you going to be in violation. Are you going to be offering the sacrifice? So keves minayin. How do I know the kevesh? Sorry, kevesh minayin. Keves is a sheep. Kevesh is a ramp. Kevesh minayin. How do I know to include? I told you I always make that mistake. Yeah. The ramp. How do I know kevesh minayin? How do I know to include the ramp? Talmud lomar. Therefore it says, Vel mizbeach lo yalu. And also on the mizbeach it shall not go up, which means that not only is the mizbeach a problem, but going up towards the mizbeach also is a problem. So therefore the mizbeach and the ramp are going to be in the same category. Rabbi Elazar Amar Pater. Rabbi Elazar says you are exempt. My time why? Damar Kra, because the pasuk says, and this is the pasuk right before that, that says all seor and dvash, seor v'dvash. So that you're not allowed to bring up using honey or leavened product on the mizbeach. Korban reishis takrivu osam hu de Rabbi lach kavesh k'mizbeach avamidi achrini lo. As far as the prohibition goes, as far as putting honey and putting leavening product on the mizbeach, only those items are prohibited to go on the ramp. Because it says, those items that were listed in the previous pasuk, those are prohibited to go on the ramp. Anything else that's prohibited to go on the mizbeach, i.e. items that are burned from a burned offering to items that are not supposed to be burned, putting those on the ramp are not a violation. So that's how he discussed, how they disagree. Rabbi Yochanan, now we're on 58a1. Rabbi Yochanan, hi osam mayavidle. What does he do with the word osam? Mibayle Lichedetanya. We learn it as we see in the following brisa. Let's say a person can make a promise, right? He wants to donate. He watches these Kohanim and they're bringing these 2 chametz loaves of bread as part of their korban on Shavuos. And he says, I'd like to do that. I'd like to bring a korban that's chametz bread. So you might think you could do that. And I might say, hey, the pasuk says you gotta do everything that you promise, right? You promise that that's the offering you're going to bring. Bring 2 loaves of chametz bread. Tamin Lomar, the pasuk says about the shtei alechem that pasuk we just read, korban reishis takrivu. This is a first korban. Why is it called a first korban, by the way? Because this korban was the first one that used the new wheat of the year, right? All the korbanos up until that point used previous year's wheat. This one was now the first korban using the new wheat. So this is supposed to be a korban brought as from the first wheat, meaning tzibor amarti lecha v'lo yachid. This korban, which is unusual as we described because it has chametz in it, is the only korban that can be offered with leavening as bread, not anything an individual can bring. An individual cannot pledge to bring chametz and bring it. Can't be brought. Right? So why can't a individual bring it? Because there's never a circumstance where an individual has an obligatory offering that requires bread. Right, all of obligatory offerings that an individual, like a korban chatos, we had the minchas chote, those korbanos are all not chametz, right? So therefore, it wouldn't include. Ella aval yehet tzibor mevi shemevi chovaso kayotze ba. But, right, maybe what if the community makes a pledge? How does a community make a pledge? Right? We know that if the korban, if the mizbeach is being unused, that's disrespectful. So we try to buy extra sacrifices to keep the mizbeach constantly in use. So maybe in order to keep the mizbeach in use, you can take a couple of loaves of bread and you can offer that as a sacrifice. After all, we know that 2 loaves of bread can be usable in a community sacrifice, which is obligatory on Shavuos. So maybe they could bring it. Talmud Lomar, therefore the pasuk says, only now, only this one obligatory time are you permitted to bring chametz bread, right? But, right, so
what about bringing your 2 loaves of bread on Shabbat?
Well, that's not a sacrifice.
No, it's not.
Right, so the problem is on the mizbeach, right? Okay, so that's the only time, but you're not going to bring 2 loaves of bread as a gift offering at any other time. So, uma yesh lecha lahavi, so, shtei alechem min ha'seor ubikurim min ha'dvash. So now, what are you going to include as far as this prohibition from osam that you can't bring them up onto the ramp? It's going to be the 2 loaves of bread, which is from seor, which is leavened, and bikurim is also this offering is called bikurim. It's a first offering. So bikurim reminds us of the first fruits, which is from dvash, which is honey, because dates are date honey, right? So therefore, that's what it reminds. So those 2 items, seor and dvash, are the items that you cannot and that you can never bring osam, that you can't bring as a sacrifice. Now, Ushtei halechem lo yikrevu nedava. It says that 2 loaves of bread cannot be brought as a offering that's donated. Ve'atanya, but 1 second, we have a brisa. Im nemar kol seor. So if the pasuk says all leavening agents that you can't bring, lama nemar kol dvash. Why does it have to say all honey also can't be brought on the mizbeach, right? All you would have to say is kol seor udvash. All honey and all leavening and honey. The all would go as a modifier for both. So kol seor v'dvash. Why do I have to say kol seor v'kol dvash? Why is that written that way? Im nemar kol dvash lama nemar kol seor. Or I could write it the other way. Kol dvash v'seor. Whichever way it is. I don't need to write the word kol twice. The answer is because there's differences in the laws. To tell me there's differences in the laws between the prohibition against bringing leavened product and bringing honey onto the altar. Because seor huter miklolo b'migdash. When it comes to leavening, there is a circumstance in a korban that you can bring it. Right? There is a circumstance you can bring it. And dvash lo hutra mikol b'mikdash. Honey, there's never a circumstance, no korban that you're required to bring honey for, so there's never a circumstance where it's okay. Dvash hutra b'shari menachos. Honey, when you're finishing up, remember we said that the rest of the bread that the Kohen's going to eat in the container, he can eat it any way he wants. Well, if he decides he wants to smear some marmalade and some honey on it, he can. No problem with doing that. But seor lo tu b'shar menachos. But we said you're never allowed to put chametz onto the leftovers, right? You can't, as we said, yes, you can't make anything chametz. So since the laws of the two are different, right? The honey sometimes is more strict than the leavening, and the leavening is sometimes more strict than the honey. That's why the Torah says, kol seor, all the seor, and all the dvash. Now, in that brisa, it said that there's a circumstance where we have chametz, where we have the 2 loaves of bread, which are permitted. Seor dehutra mikol b'mikdash ma'inihu. Where do you see bread that's permitted to be brought? Lav shtei halechem dekrava nedava. I mean, we wouldn't call it the obligatory offerings because that's not a heter, right? We must be saying that they could be offered as donated offerings. You just said they can't be. So how are you going to explain that? So Rav Amram says, L'karev imahem. We're saying that we're talking about we are talking about the obligatory offerings, the ones that are brought together with Shavuos. Those can be brought. So therefore, that's the circumstance with the shtei lechem, which is not an nedava, so therefore they're never brought as an nedava. Well, ihachi, if that's true, so bikurim nami, so then why do you explain the word bikurim to mean the dates, which is a separate gift, right, where we're going to bring the first fruits? Why are we talking about that? There is something that is brought by the Mizbeach. It's not learned in the Mishnah. Hagozolos shalgabi hasalin hayu olos. When they would bring the first fruits to the Beis Hamikdash, they made a big fanfare about it. Why? Because the tzdukim used to pick the wrong day for Shavuos all the time. Why? Because the pasuk says that you start counting Omer mimocharas hashavas. So they said always start counting the Omer on a Sunday. And we count Omer always the second day of Pesach, right? Everything's about Pesach and Chametz these days, right? So we're going to count Omer on the second day of Pesach. So they have the wrong day. To make a big fuss out of the fact that they have the wrong day, right? We're going to make sure that we make a big parade when we start bringing all of these, any of these items that start on Shavuos. So when they would bring the baskets, they would bring birds together with the baskets. So put some birds, they tie the birds to the baskets, and they bring the baskets of fruit. And what did they do with the birds? They were donated offerings. They used them as an olah together that went with it. So now, what did you tell me? You told me that the bread is different than the dates, than the honey. Why? Because the bread, we said the bread is being offered uniquely because it is a part of another korban that's being offered, which is not the case by the dates. But the dates come together with birds, and the birds are also being brought as a korban. So the dates are also part of a sacrifice. So the answer is vasalim should be yadam niton lekohanim. And by the way, the baskets were given as gifts to the kohanim. So the answer is no, that's different because hanuhu la'ater bikurim hudasu. The birds are not really a sacrifice of obligation that are linked to the first fruits. It just happens to be that they gave them as a gift at the same time. It was just a celebratory gesture. Right. Whereas the shtei lechem, we learned, were completely attached to those sheep, right? We even had an opinion that said you can't bring the 2 loaves of bread without the sheep. And if you had them together, once you slaughter the sheep, if you lose the bread, then the whole thing becomes invalid. Remember, so those two are really linked together. That's a different level. Okay, a little bit more. Boi Rami Bar Chama me Rav Chisda. So Rami Bar Chama asked Rav Chisda the following question: Hamala mi basar chatos ha'of al gabe hamizbeach. Let's say somebody takes the meat from the chatos bird. Okay, when you take a bird chatos, the kohen does malika, and then they eat the animal, they eat the korban, they eat the bird. Now, mahu, are you going to be coming? Is it? So in this circumstance, kol shemimenu leishim amarachmana, all these sacrifices have some part of it that's burned, right? And so therefore, since part of it's burned, the rest of it becomes prohibited to be brought on the Mizbeach. V'hai, but this Korban Chatos, if we remember, Amy Menulishim, none of the bird gets burnt, right? It's all of it is supposed to be eaten by the Kohanim, but the bird doesn't get burnt. So therefore, it doesn't apply to the prohibition. If you burn the bird, it's not prohibited in the same way, because it's not, some of the rest of the sacrifice is not burned. O Dilma, Kol Sheshmo Korban, or we just look at it like this. Once it's a sacrifice and you're not supposed to burn it, if you burn it, so then you're in violation. V'hainami, so this also, Shmo Korban, it is a Korban. And so therefore, we just made the rule, which is, once it's not supposed to be burnt, if you burn it, it's a violation. So Amarle, so Rav Chisda answers, Kol Sheshmo Korban, as long as it is a Korban, V'hainami Shmo Korban, this is a Korban. So if you burn that bird chatos, which is supposed to be eaten on the Mizbeach, then that is going to be a violation, your prohibition. Ketanai, but that is a machlokas tanaim. It's not really, everybody doesn't hold that way. Rabbi Eliezer says, Kol shmi menu liishim, anything that has a part of it burned, you can't burn the rest of it. And Rabbi Kiva Omar, Kol sheshmo korban, anything that is called a korban cannot be burnt. My beinaihu, what is the practical difference between them? Rav Chisda says, Besar chatos of ika beinaihu, the difference is this case. The bird chatos, which is supposed to be eaten but not burnt, that's the difference between them. Rav says, I'll give you another difference between the two. Log shemen shel metzora kibinai. What about the log of oil that comes together with the person who has tsaras? So the Tani Levi, as Levi says, kol korbanom, right? This says kol korbanom is part of the description called korbanom is l'rabos log shemen shel metzora. It's called a korban. It's supposed to be going, and it says all of that korban can be given as a gift to the kohanim. Once you apply from the oil of the metzora, you put it onto his head, onto his thumb, onto his big toe. What do you do with the rest of the oil? It becomes a present. The rest of it goes as a present and is given to the kohen. So it doesn't get burnt, but it is a korban. So again, it's the same thing as the chatos. If it's not burnt, but it's a korban, so according to the opinion that says if it's burnt, then burning the rest of it is prohibited, then you can't burn it either. According to the opinion that says it has to be a korban, this is a korban and it would be prohibited. Okay, we could probably stop here. Nun Ches Amud Aleph.